Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to our live webinar, which is brought to you by BMI KSA chapter. My name is Aisha Shoka from BMI KSA chapter. At the beginning, I would like to thank you all for joining us today. We hope that you enjoy the experience. The topic of the webinar is hybrid project management, and our presenter is Janet Burns. Before I give the floor to our presenter, please note that we will take all the questions in between and at the end of the webinar. So if you have any questions, please make sure to type them all into the question box located in your Zoom app or through the Q&A box to be addressed at the end by the presenter. For those PMI members, please note that you will receive one video for this webinar by a code in your email within 2 weeks, inshallah. Janet, you are most welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be here and talk about hybrid project management. It's a very favorite topic of mine. And I'm really happy to be presenting to your chapter. I've been involved with PMI for a very long time. I actually helped start up a chapter in Virginia years ago, which was fun and exciting and frustrating a little bit, but mostly it was exciting. And I've also been involved lately with the Delaware Valley chapter in Philadelphia. So I have my Philadelphia Delaware Valley chapter shirt on. I also was part of the PMBOK 4th edition team. If you didn't know already, the PMBOK is developed by people in the field, and so you can contribute your learnings to that. And that was an interesting experience as well. So I'm a big PMI fan. I'm a big project management fan. I do a lot of consulting and teaching of project management, teaching some PMP prep courses, as well as teaching general topics on project management. And in my consulting roles, I do a lot of PMO setups and developments. So either helping organizations start up a PMO if they don't have one already, or helping them to mature their PMO. Maybe they have a project management office that isn't doing what they want it to do. So they need to, improve how that project management office is operating. And I've been doing that for a number of years in consulting because I did that in my professional corporate career as well. I worked for several companies here in the US that you may or may not have heard of. Cigna is a large insurance company. The New York Times is probably a company that you've heard of. I set up and led the PMO for the New York Times for several years. And also for MTV, the music company in New York City. So hybrid project management is really something that I've been dealing with for a while with my work, because I help organizations create methodologies to do work. And I've learned over the years that one size doesn't fit all. It's always been very difficult setting up methodologies where the process works for all projects. It's not reasonable for most organizations. So hybrid project management is something I've been talking about for a long time, maybe not using the word hybrid, but using different approaches for tailoring. But now it's become more mainstream. It's part of the PMBOK. It's part of the approach for tailoring your methods. So I want to give you my perspective on that. I also want to talk about the PMI perspective. What does PMI, how is PMI embracing hybrid? Why is it important? So that's a little bit of the background of why this topic is important to me, and why it's an interesting topic to dive into at this point in time. Okay, so let's get going. So what's our agenda? I'll cover an introduction and background. Why is hybrid important? What is it in terms of definitions? And then hybrid, is comprised of methodologies and putting them together. So we'll review some of the core characteristics of each methodology. This could be, if I got into the details of all the methodologies, we could talk about this for a few days. But I'll talk at a high level about different methodologies and the characteristics of those. And then we'll talk about skills and organizational considerations. So if you're thinking about using a hybrid approach, what kind of skills might you need for you and your team? And also, what organizational considerations do you need to think about? What's important in terms of the organization itself, how things work, that kind of thing. And then we will talk about putting together a hybrid approach. So this webinar is based on a class that I did for an online company called Udemy. And what I tried to do in that class is give people tools for applying a hybrid to their projects. So that's how I'll approach this webinar after we go over some of the basics. How do you put together a hybrid approach? What are the things that you have to think about? I've got a few checklists that I'll introduce to help you with that. So, tools that you can use to think about putting together a hybrid approach. And then a quick summary about the future of hybrid project management, at least from my perspective. Where is it going? What will be the future that we'll see? What are the differences that you might see in the future that you don't see now? So little on the introduction and background. What is hybrid project management? What do we mean when we say that? So definition of hybrid, the dictionary definition is anything that is a mixture of two or more things. So standard examples are cars, automobiles, right, are now offering a lot of hybrid options. So they use gas and electric. So that's a hybrid. Plants, a lot of plants are mixed together to develop a new hybrid plant, or vegetables to develop new hybrids of those. And then, the latest, use of hybrid that you hear is working conditions. Because of the pandemic, people are trying to develop hybrid options for working or presenting. So sometimes I work at home, sometimes I go to the office. So those two things are being mixed to develop a new way of doing things. So that's really the method that we, or the definition of hybrid. But for this course, we're talking about combining the best parts of a specific method used to manage a project. And the recent PMBOK update identifies the two most prominent types of methods as predictive and agile or adaptive. So I'll intermix these terms a little bit, but we'll talk about the definitions of those just so we're on the same page in terms of what I mean by those. But in general, predictive approaches are much less formal. They're more linear, and agile approaches are less formal and more iterative. So we'll get a little bit more into the definitions of those other terms that you might hear for those. But hybrid project management is looking at those methods and taking pieces of them to develop a new method. So really tailoring things. And when I say that we've been doing this for a long time, you probably, if you're subject to methodology approaches in your organization for running projects, sometimes they don't apply to small projects. Maybe there's big projects that need certain rigor, but for small projects, they don't. So maybe you tailor things. You don't have to do all of the deliverables, or you don't have to do all of the phase gates. That's really also, taking a hybrid approach. So it's tailoring to develop the right approach for your project. Okay, wrong way. Sorry about that. So why is it important now? Why is hybrid important now? How has it become more mainstream? A couple of things. The rate of change in the world is prompting us to take more in demand approaches to how we're going to deliver projects. Things change too fast, and it takes too long sometimes to follow old methods. So we've got to find ways to, be more nimble to do that rate of change. And really, because of that rate of change, there's a need for faster results or value. There's a lot of competition. There's a lot of progress around the world, and projects and organizations want to deliver results faster. They want to, deliver value faster. So hybrid helps, get to that level of success. And then the diversity of projects has changed. We've got a lot of different types of projects. Technology has really catapulted all of these elements, but we've got a lot of different types of projects that need some level of rigor, some level of methodology, but not like the projects that we used to only talk about in the past. The PMBOK initially was written for large engineering and construction projects. My chapter in the Delaware Valley has an advisor, Jim Snyder, who was one of the founders of PMI and the PMBOK. And he'll tell you that was the initial group that put it together based on those big engineering and construction projects, manufacturing projects. As the rate of change has changed, as technology has changed, those methods, those predictive methods, haven't been able to keep up. So trying to combine some of those as well as the new methods is really what hybrid brings to the table. So as there's a lot of change, and as we need to deliver more, we need to get to more agile approaches. We need to deliver in more increments. We need to, get usable product, usable value in the hands of the end user or the end customer. And that's what hybrid helps us to do. So let's talk a little bit about characteristics of PM methods. Just at a high level, what are some characteristics of the methods that we would use to build our hybrid? So we've got a plan driven on the left-hand side and change driven on the right-hand side. So I wanted to give you just a couple of other key words used when we're talking about the different methods. Because there are commercial methods out there, that have their own names and their own approaches. But I'm going to talk at a more high generic level. I'm not talking about any specific tool or process in particular. So on the left, we've got plan driven, which we also call sometimes waterfall method or predictive. And that is something that provides a more defined scope up front. You can define your scope, and then you can estimate your costs, estimate your schedule, and then manage to that plan. So it's predictive. You're able to predict what you're going to spend, when. You're able to predict what you're going to deliver because you have a scope that's tied to a schedule, that's tied to a budget. So it's based on that plan, very predictive. On the other side, we've got change driven. So change driven, the common term that we use is agile. And I sometimes say it's agile with a lowercase a, not an uppercase a. So it's just trying, agile approaches or agile methods in general are adaptive. They're able to be changed. So that's why it's called change driven. we're building in change, and we know the change is coming, so we're building that into the methodology. So I'll use the words predictive and adaptive a lot coming up, but you may hear me use Agile, waterfall, etc. And then hybrid is, building in the best of both on a project or a work stream. How sometimes some of these approaches might be best for a part of the project or not. And I have examples to talk about through that as we go along through the session. Okay, I thought I had one more point to make about that. But yeah, one more point, just a quick example. I grew up in IT in software development. So, my first job was a tester in software development. And then I kind of got into a business analyst role, which at the time was called a methods and procedures analyst. And then into, project management. Those projects, they were software development projects for Cigna, large insurance company. They would take 2 years. And we would actually, have a team. We had a team of people that were co-located in a separate room or in a separate office from the main office that worked on building software for 2 years. Very hard to imagine now. And in some cases, by the time we came out of that office, it was like being in the back room. By the time we came out of that office, that software wasn't needed anymore because changes happen. So that's really been the beauty of building in change-driven approaches. They really help with situations like that. So a couple more things. Predictive methods. So these methods, they take more planning up front, right? And then the plan is executed in a sequential process. They focus on analyzing and planning the future in detail and catering for known risks. So common example, we build a new house, we've got a plan, we design, we construct, and then we move in. Some of the pros of predictive methods, clear idea from the beginning of the total project picture. So you know what the project's going to be. You've got cost, schedule, and scope. You've got that good detailed plan. And it's, you're able to manage to that. What are the cons of predictive methods? Not a lot of room for changes. And it could cause rework if problems are caught too late. So that's what happened on some of those software development projects that I worked on. When changes would come in, we would have a lot of rework to do because we were following this predictive method. We were building software based on requirements that we got a year ago. And, rework was necessary if there were changes. So I'm going to talk about pros and cons of each. I'm not an advocate of one or the other. I'm an advocate of hybrid. I'm an advocate of build your own. That's what I'm really an advocate of. But I think it's important to talk about what are the core, pros and cons of each. And then on the adaptive side, when I talk about adaptive, I really mean all forms of Agile standards, as well as incremental and iterative approaches. So incremental means you're delivering small increments of something, and iterative means you're developing versions of something. So they all share the same characteristics of delivering a product or value sooner. They have different approaches to do it. There's different methodologies in the Agile world that have different tools and techniques to do it. But, this second bullet is really key. They share the characteristic of delivering product value sooner, but have different approaches for doing it. So also Agile methodologies will focus on time boxes to deliver functionality. They promote development, teamwork, collaboration, and process adaptability throughout the life cycle of the project. So you're basically welcoming change. Years ago, IBM released a tool called the Rational Unified Process. And there were 5 or 6 kind of core tenets that product was based on. It was the beginning of an agile approach. It was, it was really coined more iterative at the time. But one of them was change is constant. It's not going to go away. You have to adopt change instead of reject it. So I remember hearing that, and it was radical at the time. It was because I was against change, because change to me impacted my projects negatively. It meant that I had to go back and do rework. But that's because I was using a predictive approach that had that, belief built in. So using adaptive methods, helps address that issue. And usually something is delivered in iterations, maybe 2 to 4 weeks. So what are the pros of adaptive methods? Providing a usable product, AKA value, faster, and the ability to accommodate change without significant rework. So you're getting something in the hands of an end user quickly, and you've got the ability to change without significant rework. You wouldn't necessarily say no rework, but not significant. What are some of the cons of adaptive methods? Ability to accurately forecast cost and final project completion dates. So if you're not planning out like you do with predictive projects, this can become more complex. And then tracking progress can also be challenging in an ever-changing environment. So you're constantly trying to get updates, things are changing, you've got to track all of that. And that's why one of the approaches of adaptive projects is to, collaborate and work together with the team to create those things. So let me stop and answer a couple questions. So first one, Mansoor, based on your experience, how would you deal with end users in which always changing their mind as the project progresses? So that I would say that we, use some kind of adaptive method, if you can, for what they're getting. Make sure that they're engaged, make sure that you're, including them and, getting those ideas throughout the project. If you can keep them engaged and deliver what they want within the time frame of when they ask for it, and then in the next iteration deliver something different, that will help with that approach. Let's see. Next question. What do you think? Is there any chance to introduce AI measuring the value as planned in the project management? Very good question. I think that sometimes I have a AI on that first screen as one of the drivers of hybrid or a different approach. AI is definitely coming up, and it will start to, seep into all of the measures and controls that we have in project management. So I think that is something that you will actually see start to measure value and how it's being delivered to the end user. I already see a couple of AI companies that are being built from organizations that I know built like Microsoft Project or other software development tools. The people that built those tools are now running AI companies trying to automate some of those things that we have to do manually and build the intelligence into those. Let's see, how easy to adapt Agile methodology in EPC projects for a contractor who's primarily looking for cost saving and mobilizing the resources in short time. So that's Suresh. I'll talk a little bit about construction or contractors coming up, but your question is good in terms of what are some of the if you're looking for cost saving and mobilizing the resources in a short time, those goals, how can you fit them into your hybrid approach? Is it reasonable that you can do that, or is it something that you may have to have a more rigorous approach so you can track that data more carefully? Formal methodology. I'm talking adaptive. Adaptive is a generic term. I think that's the question. Is this a formal methodology? And adaptive is really a generic description of all Agile projects. And we're going to talk about next about what's the basis to choose among both for my projects. So good question, Mohammed. I will get into that. All right. Thank you, guys. Great questions. And let me know if I'm missing anything. So just a couple. Sorry, I have a very active mouse that gets ahead of me sometimes. So just to wrap up the differences between the two methodologies, right? We've got in terms of the triple constraint, we're PMI members, we're project managers. We know what the triple constraint is. So the big difference in traditional versus Agile is that what's fixed in traditional is the scope. So just like I said, that requirements document is written in stone, and that's what you based everything else on. On the flip side, in the Agile side, what's fixed is the cost and the time. The scope is variable. So if we've got a team of 4 working for 2 weeks on each iteration, we know what that time is, right? It's 2 weeks, and we know what the cost is. It's the cost of those resources and whatever other expenses for that time period. But the scope can change in there. As folks ask for new things, or as things change, as the world changes, as it has been very rapidly lately, we can factor those changes into our project and work with those before reaching the end. So we have a lot more ability to do that. We don't have that ability in traditional projects. Okay, a couple other questions before I go on. Yeah, Hajar, let's see. Do you think in IT project management software uses Agile and hardware part often uses Predictive? I think that Agile was developed for software development. That's where it came from. Software development projects were difficult and taking a lot more time. And that, a bunch of software developers got together, created the Agile manifesto and said, we need to change this. So definitely I think that does make sense that for building software, it's easier to use Agile. If you're rolling out hardware, it may be more appropriate to use a predictive approach. You've got the requirements, what they are. You may have a set schedule that you have to stick to. So that may be a more better approach for rolling out in the hardware. Let's see. How to make my team on board with this high changes. We're going to talk about that a little bit coming up. Will you share this presentation with us? Yes, I'm going to send the presentation and some of the tools I use for you to get later. Scope keeps changing. If the scope keeps changing, do you need to revalidate it? Yes, it's not like when the customer asks for something new, it's not just, okay, let's do it. If you're still using a methodology, you're still looking at the other requirements you have, you're still looking at the impact of adding that to the project. And that's one of the things that I think gets missed in a lot of Agile implementations. People think that it means no rules, no documentation, let's just do whatever we want. But it's still a methodology. It's still a process. You still have to deliver on these 3 things. So you've got to make sure that you are validating and making sure that it's still the right thing to add to the scope. Let's see. What's the impact of the AI on the project management fundamentals? That's a big question. I think I'm going to hold that to the end. I have a couple of AI examples I can give that I know folks are working on. And then in terms of your experience, what is the best PM software for hybrid approach, MS Project or other software? Do you think linear programming or other programming will help to change automatically factors for others like scope, cost, and budget? First question there, I think that hard to say what software is best. I've been using different softwares with my clients lately. Most of the big mainstream software like Primavera, like Microsoft Project, are building in adaptive approaches into them. So you can do things both ways. It depends, and I will talk about this a little bit later. If you look at the criteria of the organization, you know, what kind of tools will help you achieve your goals. So I always say that the right tool is the one that will help you achieve your goals, not necessarily the one that, you know, is the most popular. But most of the mainstream tools, I would actually go out on a limb here and say that all of them are building in things like Kanban boards or some kind of estimating, you know, approach that's more in line with the way that Agile approaches do things. And then I'm not sure that the question about linear programming, I think that that's a tough one, and I'm not sure that I could answer that. It's hard to say, but I do think I have a slide at the end talking about how the new PMP looks, and I think that may change the way that some of approaches are used in projects. All right, good questions. So what are some of the skills and organizational considerations that we need to think about when building the hybrid? And I break them down into hard skills and soft skills, but you can also think of those as technical skills and people skills. So I'm just using some, you know, terminology. First of all, you know, hard skills are the technical skills that the PM needs to be effective delivering hybrid projects. So it depends on, you know, what the approach used is. And it also is important for the team to have certain skills. So if you're using traditional SDLC, do you have experience in that? Do you know the language of that? Do you know how to write, you know, a core document like a business requirements spec, whatever's, you know, built into that methodology? If you're using Scrum, do you have the skills to do that? If you're using SAFe or Discipline Agile. So these are just a few examples, but the hard or technical skills can really be thought of as, you know, fitting whatever the specific tool is that's required. And I have a picture of a checklist that I've used for hybrid skills assessments. So here's an example of what some of the technical skills that you might need depending on the approach that you're using. So how are you prioritizing, you know, requirements? What's the method to do that? How do you need to plan sprints, managing backlogs, if you're using sprint, backlog grooming, what's the Scrum method itself, if you're using the lean method approach, tools like using burn down charts and Kanban, you know, do you have those skills? So understanding what the technical skills are for the approaches may be important for deciding, you know, maybe you'd like to use Scrum, but You don't have any training in it. You don't have any experience. Nobody on the team has used it before. So it may not be the right fit until you get those skills, you know, up to par. And then specific skills in certain Agile methods. Let me go back to questions real fast before I carry on. So for Agile projects, how come the scope is variable while the time and cost are fixed? Can you clarify? Yes. So think of the way I like to describe Agile projects is, you know, by using a basic Kanban board, which is one of the tools that is used in Agile. And I actually have I don't have it in my room right now, but I actually have one that I use for myself. So I've got what we call a backlog of requirements, right? And that's my scope. So that equals the requirements specification that you would do for a predictive project. So I've got these on a board, and let's say my board is Post-it notes, right? I've got a board with Post-it notes. That's my backlog. And then I've got, you know, what I'm working on and then what I finished. So, you know, today or the team gets together and they want to develop something in the next 2 weeks. They look at that backlog of requirements that equals the scope. They work with the customer, product owner to say what's important this week. They pull those off and then they develop those, and that goes into that iteration. But then when they're ready to do the next iteration, they go back and they look again. So what scope should be put in now? You know, they start to build that, but if there's a change, it's easy to make an adjustment because they're delivering things in very small increments. So it's easy to shift gears. So that's really the way that scope can be variable on a project. It's a scope. Think of it as the scope of those particular iterations. That's variable. Hybrid, is hybrid more relevant for any particular industry or type of project? I don't think so. My examples are kind of all over the case, all over the spectrum. But you know, in terms of formal predictive methods, they may be more relevant for big utility companies that, you know, have a lot of governance, have a lot of requirements, you know, have critical facilities to manage. They may not want to employ any adaptive projects. So you can think of that as, you know, maybe a line where you can draw that hybrid wouldn't work because they've got to stay full predictive. And is there any software that's suited to support hybrid? I think I talked about that already. Okay. So what about soft skills? Soft skills or people skills? Soft skills are key in determining the best hybrid approach. Learning a technique or a method or following a process is something that for the most part people can be trained on, right? So we can train people on SAFe. We can train people on developing a burn down chart. But when we talk about soft skills, you know, that's something different. And when you're leading a hybrid project, there are certain soft skills that will be critical. Things like leadership, negotiation, because, you know, by definition, you're doing two different things, and that's requiring some negotiation with how those things happen. Building the team, definitely communication, because you are, you know, you're communicating a new process, and you're communicating to the team and your customers what has to be done. Emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is really understanding, you know, how people's emotions affect their work, how your emotions affect your work. And hybrid is something different than, you know, that it may create conflict. It may create issues where you have to deal with emotional intelligence. And then organizational change management. So you're doing something different. You've got to make sure that the organization understands that and that they're adapting it. And then last but not least, especially when it comes to Agile approaches, servant leadership. So servant leadership means that you are leading from behind. You are serving the team. The team is really self-managed. They're running themselves. They're able to make decisions. That's very key because things happen fast. You know, many of you, I'm not sure what kind of organizations you work for, but, you know, I've worked for a wide spectrum of organizations here in the US. And some of those organizations were very formal, big insurance companies, and it took a long time to get decisions made. It took a long time to make things happen. And some of them were very informal. So, you know, servant leadership means that the team is able to, you know, make those decisions. They're able to, you know, work together and manage each other. And that's also a skill that needs to be taught. And they need to, you know, develop those muscles to be able to do that. So a soft skill, you know, checklist, some of the things that we might look at are, you know, good organizational skills, prioritization, thriving under pressure, you know, making sure that we've got excellent communication skills, influence skills, negotiation, and as I said, servant leadership. And then it's important to also understand the organizational characteristics. Projects and project managers don't operate in a vacuum. So they have to, the project and the method has to be a good fit for the organization. So when we discuss the organization, whatever it is, you know, that's using a hybrid approach, some of the questions that you might ask are, is there formal decision making? Like I just said, is there a hierarchy of how decisions have to be made? Does it take a long time? Is it very formal? What kind of regulatory environment is the organization working in? What kind of oversight or governance is required? And will that impact how I run my project? Are there certain requirements? Is it a cross-functional or matrix environment? So do people work within their silos, or do they work well across each other? Is there transparency into project information? You know, one of the things that Agile adaptive projects use are these tools like Kanban boards and burn down and burn up charts to show how the project's doing. You know, can I do that? You know, when a couple of you asked about tools, do people use the tools? Are they adopted? Is it okay to share information? You know, as I've been consulting over the past several years, I've worked with different organizations, and some of it is by necessity, depending on what they were working on, where projects really couldn't share information or didn't want to. So it could be, you know, sort of the nature of the business, but it also could be the culture of the organization. So are tools embraced? You know, that's key. And how are those tools embraced is one question to ask. And then are there co-located or dispersed teams? So this is a topic that's up for not debate, I would say these days, but up for discussion. You know, it used to be kind of a rule that Agile teams needed to be co-located because that helped facilitate the decision making. They worked together better together when they were co-located. So that's a factor when you're thinking about whether to do it. Now, everybody's been working remotely for a couple of years now, at least partially remotely, depending on what you do. And, you know, is that something that you can still, you know, do well and make quick decisions and have that team building atmosphere that you want? That's the topic that I think is up to date or up for debate. But more importantly is, do you have teams that can work well together and make decisions quickly? I think whether it's in person or remote is really just a factor, not a deciding, characteristic. But think about the organization. You know, will they adapt this hybrid approach? Okay. So just some key criteria then for putting together a hybrid approach. The first one that I talk about is fit for purpose. Methodologies are tools. If I have a toolbox next to me, I want to pick up the right tool to use. So, ask some questions about whether or not the process is whether or not, the mix of certain things is right based on the project. So if you're looking to see if Agile could be a fit for part of the project, is it the type that could benefit from a more flexible approach? And, would flexibility be, adopted? Can you put incremental value into the customer's hand? Is it even possible? So if I'm building a house, is there something that the customer can use before the house is finished? Those kinds of projects, it's hard to think about doing that. But if I'm building somebody a website, surely I can get them the first version of the website to use, and then I can add more features after that. So, those are the questions to ask. Is it important to get feedback as the team produces value? So instead of waiting as for longer projects to get feedback, you want to get feedback sooner from the customer. So maybe the example that someone said of a difficult customer or someone who changes a lot, we want to get a lot of feedback quickly. So that may be important, and that may be the deciding factor for using Agile for part of the project. And then the co-location, is the project co-located, or how can the team be self-managed? And then questions to ask if waterfall or predictive projects is a fit. Do you have requirements for documentation? Is there rigor that you have to stick to? Is there oversight by a governing body? I worked for a state I worked for the state of New Jersey a few years ago on a project, and big projects. This was the Department of Transportation, and they actually have the biggest amount of roads and the most traffic in the US and New Jersey. So these were all the capital projects for those projects for that state, and that's who I was working with. There's a lot of layers of oversight, and there's a lot of layers of how they get funding for the projects. There was no way that those construction projects could build in any Agile pieces. They had to be predictive. There were maybe parts of them that could build in Agile, and I'll give you an example of that coming up actually. And is it critical to have well thought out estimates and track them throughout the project? So in Agile, Agile projects, it's not that you don't map out what the roadmap is, or you don't map out what your releases will look like. But you are expecting that may change. If you've got a situation where change isn't accepted, and I've seen this in these large public sector projects here in the US, then you can't really build in Agile into your project. So just a couple questions, but the key thing is fit for purpose. Is it the right methodology for this project that I'm working on? Risk and complexity is another one. So the risk factors associated with the project, along with the complexity of the project, are also characteristics. So what are the unknowns? Are there a lot of unknowns? Are there a lot of work streams in the project? Are there a lot of interdependencies? So depending on the nature of the risk, adaptive or predictive may be the best approach, but you need to understand, those risks so you can figure out where adaptive might help you. The risk of the customer who constantly changes requirements, that says to me, adaptive, but maybe you have a risk of losing funding if you don't have a good plan for the project, so that I would use predictive. So risk and complexity is another factor. And then something that I call a transitional approach. So a lot of organizations are doing Agile transformations, and they take time. So instead of, switching an organization, and this is what I do a lot with setting up PMOs, from a predictive approach to adaptive, overnight or even over 3 months, 6 months, a year, hybrid can become a stepping stone. So maybe you build in some hybrid approaches, or build in some agile approaches to your predictive project in a way to get adoption of new ways of working. So quick case studies of these examples. And I'll send this out to everybody, so I'm not going to read these to you, but fit for use. So we've got a township building a new administration building. As that building is being built, there's no way to, deliver pieces of it, right? So we've got to do traditional predictive method in this case for the construction of the project. But we're also building a website to inform the community about the progress of that project. So the building of that website is another work stream of the project that can be done in a more agile approach. So we've got the construction using predictive, the communication with the website using agile. And then there's another element of fit. I'm talking about a public sector project, and we've got some requirements in terms of, using reporting up. So, using a more predictive approach will help us with that for the construction piece. Risk complexity. A large project is planned for a company in the banking business. Part of the project is being run by a new vendor, and that's an unknown. So if I'm running that project, I may want to use a predictive approach to manage that vendor, because it will help me see more rigor and detail of how that vendor will perform. If the risk complexity was low, then maybe the agile approach would be appropriate, because you could deliver requirements quickly. So that's where risk can help you make a decision either way. And then the transitional example that I talked about, a project manager is engaged by a company to run a large project. The project manager has used Agile. They want to bring it to the company, but there's not a lot of experience. But there is one stakeholder who's very advocating for Agile and would like to use it. So the PM decides to use Agile in a part of the project, with support from that stakeholder, and waterfall across the rest of the project. So things like just using some of the Agile tools like Kanban, sprints, stand-up meetings. She's able to demonstrate the value of the adaptive approaches to that, to the project. So I have a hybrid checklist that kind of sums up everything that I've talked about. And I'm going to take a quick look at that, but I will have I will send this to you after. Let me just switch my share screen real quick. Sorry. I will send this to you guys afterwards, so you'll have it. So this really sums up a lot of what I talked about, right? Understanding fit for purpose. On the left side, we've got things that are more fit for Agile. On the right side, things that are more fit for waterfall or predictive. And then the same with risk and complexity. On the left, better fit for Agile. On the right, better fit for waterfall. And then other approaches for transitioning or tailoring. So I'll make sure you have a copy of this, but it really is a summary of everything that I've talked about. So let me switch back. And I just have one more screen, and then we can do some more questions before we wrap up. Okay, and I'll go back into my. So the future of hybrid, PMI is trending towards more non-prescriptive methods. Actually, the PMBOK and PMI has never tried to be a methodology, but it's been adopted as such because it was, pretty specific to certain approaches in the beginning. They're moving away from that. And this picture shows how the 6th edition has been morphed into the 7th edition, which is out now. The PMP exam hasn't changed, but it will eventually change, and it'll build in, much more of the agile approaches, the adaptive approaches. So understanding those and retrofitting them in with predictive approaches will become really key. So it will be an essential tool for PMs. I look at a lot of project manager job descriptions. I get a lot of job alerts. I'm kind of interested in, it's my way of staying in touch with what's happening, out in the marketplace. And often I see in the job requirements, knowledge of, standard SDLC and agile practices. So hybrid is definitely here to stay. PMI also has a hybrid micro credential. So it's not like the PMP credential where it's a 4-hour test. There's a short class, and then it's a short 60-question test. So I have that credential, and I recommend looking into that if that's something that you're interested in. There's more on that on the PMI website. Okay, so I've answered some questions, and then we have a few minutes, I guess, for more. So let me answer questions that are in the Q&A section. Okay, some organizations and countries are preferred local project managers having average skills, ignoring benefits, exercising localism. Do you think it violates the PM Code of Ethics? That's a tough question. I would have to read. I'm not sure if that factors into the ethics part of the PMP pledge, but I could look into that. Let's see. How can cost be fixed when scope is changing? The cost is fixed in agile projects because you have the same team working on the projects. So that you're, let's say that team is all contractors and they charge $1,000 a week, and you've got 3 of them, right? It's $3,000 a week. So that's how you can actually fix the cost. And you deliver whatever scope you can for that, $3,000. Should we use a Discipline Agile toolkit to choose our hybrid approach, processes, and options? The Discipline Agile toolkit is one that is owned and promoted by PMI, and that is definitely a tool that you should look at if you're looking for a methodology to develop your toolkit. And I would say, look at some of these questions and ask, is it the right tool for our organization? Will they adopt it, or should we, look at some of the other methodologies? Okay. Any other questions? I'm looking through the chat. And the last one, the impact of AI on the management fundamentals. I think that's probably a good question to do some research on the PMI website. It's been a hot topic of late. And as I said, I do have some colleagues that are actually, they have an AI company that is working on taking meeting notes for project managers, as well as potentially identifying risks on projects just based on listening to meetings and listening and understanding what's going on for the project. And that's really pretty interesting to me. So I think that, if that's what you mean, like how will AI contribute to improving project management fundamentals? I see that, in practice now, and there's a lot more information on the PMI website. Okay, we are at time. Great questions, everybody. And thank you so much. I really enjoyed the questions. I enjoyed sharing the information with you. I'll get this deck and as well as that checklist to your chapter leaders, and they'll be able to share it with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that insightful presentation. We appreciate you being here. This webinar was brought to you by PMI KSA chapter. Thank you all for your attention, and I hope you have enjoyed and learned from this session. The recorded for this session will be available on PMI KSA YouTube channel within 14 days, inshallah. The claim code for OneBoard will be shared with the attendees who are PMI members in your email within 2 weeks, inshallah. Thanks again for joining us today, and we will see you next time.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Ma salama.
Thank you so much.